name is Andrew Ahn Westover. I'm the Keith Haring Director of Education and Public Engagement here at the New Museum in New York City. And we are thrilled to be able to host this conversation. This is part of our summer online residency, our first fully online residency for the department with the international collective Ensayos. We're going to be telling you a lot more about their work. This residency was co-organized with Emily Mello, the Associate Director of Education, and would not be possible without her incredible organizing. When we first started thinking about this residency, we were thinking about what distance was, what distance is, and this was pre-COVID, this was even in the past calendar year. And in that ensuing time, the question of distance, what it is, how it takes shape, what it means, has become all the more imperative for our daily life. So I'm excited that we're able both to premiere DISTANCIA, the second season, the web series. It is currently available on the New Museum's website, and we hope if you haven't already seen it that you will, and to be able to talk about it during today's conversation. The bios of all of our participants are available on the website, and we also have additional events throughout the summer that are scheduled in conjunction with the Ensayos residency. So we encourage you to check that out. I also want to thank in particular the Research and Residencies Council, whose generous support facilitates this work, as does that of Laurie Wolfert, among many others. So thank you to our many sponsors and friends.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks, Emily, so much for organizing this. The title that we chose for this conversation, Ecofiction at the End of the World, suggests at least three possible directions for interpreting this second season of the web series, DISTANCIA. The first is through a critique of this classical dualism, fiction, nonfiction. By referencing the concept of ecofiction, which literally muddies the binary between reality and fantasy, truth and falsity, we want to point to how the origin of all of these dualisms is an artificial divide between culture and nature. A split that I am particularly not fond of, because I see how it sits on this ideological paradigm that positions humans at the top of a pyramid, above and even outside of nature. So ecofiction is a proposition to contemplate how DISTANCIA, the web series, attempts to repair this disjunction, nature-culture, by reorienting our storytelling capacities away from a narrative plot and towards a dialogical conspiracy between the human and the more than human. DISTANCIA is really a playful redirection of our personhood towards the personhood of the environment. Now, this redirection is by no means a direct path, which takes me to the second possible direction for grasping DISTANCIA that's implied in this title and that we will talk about. And that is this notion of end of the world. Tierra del Fuego is often referred to as the end of the world. And this is mostly because its geographical location at the tail end of South America suggests that it's at the end of the world, beyond the Strait of Magellan. But I want to argue that this modern nickname, end of the world, really has another origin story. And it's related to the discovery of this Strait of Magellan in the early 1500s, 1520 to be exact, by the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan and his fleet. And so it's my conviction that this discovery of the end of the world led to the Western conception and the naturalization of the world as a conquerable entity, as an inert territory whose beginning and end can be marked, can be held in a map. So today, we are in the midst of the social and environmental havoc that mode of thinking has unleashed. But this passage from the Atlantic to the Pacific, known as the Strait of Magellan, was, before Magellan, for thousands of years, known, used, and cared for by the Kaweshkar, the Shelknam, the Tehuelche, and the Yagan peoples of the archipelago that is today known as Tierra del Fuego. I want to pay my respects to them, their elders, their young, and to the continued culture that they sustain. Now, for indigenous peoples of that region, the world as they knew it ended with the arrival of those white male explorers and the waves of European settlers that followed. So what I'm suggesting is that this end of the world is not solely a geographical marker, but a temporal one. Tierra del Fuego is a beginning and an end simultaneously, over and over again. Time there, but also elsewhere, is not linear. It's spiral-like, it's circular, it's cyclical. This is why DISTANCIA challenges the perception that at any given point in a story, it is possible to be conclusive. Every end is really just a new rite of passage. And so finally, the third direction that I want to signal to is in the past. DISTANCIA, the web series, was born as an idea for a television show. 4 years on from the beginning of Ensayos, intermittent research periods in Tierra del Fuego with some of the folk that appear in the series and others who don't, or not yet. It was really after these field works, after having spent much time in the field, that we realized that we were sitting too comfortably on our slowly acquired knowledge of that region, and that we needed to devise a technique or a methodology to distance ourselves from that subject of our affection, which was Tierra del Fuego. To be able to question the obscure and the violent histories that have come into view during our study of the effects, or that had come into view during our study of the effects of invasive species on the ecologies of the archipelago. That's what our fieldwork had been about up to then. So we felt a responsibility to ponder this ethics of caring for a territory as visitors. At around that time, and this was in 2014, we were invited to present some of the invasive species work at the Cadist Art Foundation in Paris. And we had agreed because it gave us an opportunity to come into contact with an apex moment in the history of Tierra del Fuego, a history that's violent and that is a history really of erasure of the indigenous peoples of the archipelago, some of whom had been deported to France as flora and fauna to be exhibited at the World Fair in 1889. As part of that exhibition, we staged a mock trial at the Museum of Natural History in Paris. And from this exercise and others, we scrutinized our behavior, our research ethics. We measured our intimacy and distanced ourselves from the tenderness we feel towards and from the archipelago. We were later invited back to Tierra del Fuego by a pair of locals whose story of environmental activism is one of the main narrative threads of DISTANCIA, Yvette Martinez and Julio Gaston. So as the seasons of the web series continue to unfold, Carolina, Ariel, and I, amongst others, including Mick, commit to keep evolving this methodology of affective distance that employs ecofiction as a way to responsibly revise, to keep revising over and over our relation to the past as we move away from a future that none of us want. Carolina will now share with you some reflections on the editing process and the difficulties of giving up the power of framing as a strategy within ecofiction. And she'll begin with 2 short clips that then she'll comment on.
lo puedo controlar. Es que no lo puedo controlar, ahora me wea. No, dale. No sé, se me venía a la cabeza esto de la representación de Martín Gusinde y todo lo que la encadeno con la pregunta anterior de nuestra manera de representar hoy y cuál es la articulación nueva que uno puede proponer. Y pienso en la fotografía de retrato de Martín Gusinde y pienso en esa situación de la fotografía fija en un estado, ¿no? Y me parece que eso es que nos permite conocer un retrato de indígena. No es lo que estamos haciendo, no es esa la manera, ¿no? Como y pienso en esa como contención de la fotografía, que son nada, no estoy haciendo ningún tipo de crítica ni...
¿A ti a veces te confunden con indígena?
Sí, yo creo, sí, o sea, de hecho me he preguntado si soy de Punta Arenas. Bueno,
¿Y qué te pasa cuando te dicen eso?
Cuando estoy aquí me pasa, todo bien, o sea, en un momento creo que me molestó porque por la noción de que uno tiene de la belleza.
So how to bend, to curve, to distract the power of framing and self-exposure, or how to allow other senses direct this action. Framing could be simply formulated as the action of putting a border, a decision within any image-making practice and sound-making practice, but also putting a border to define a territory, to own a property as well. It conveys the relationship between field and out of field, between what gets shown and what is left out. In Tierra del Fuego, the immensity of the landscape and its forces seems to constantly defy being controlled or accommodated within a border, being kept within the confines of any kind of protocol or planning. In this context, to define what is visible or not needs, in my particular case as making the image, to be thought as the action of bending. I call it bending. Or to allow other senses, organs, forces besides the human eye to direct it. This said, the second season of DISTANCIA organizes the storytelling from the point of view of the human participants, their voices, their words, our personal experiences. You see more human bodies, you hear more human voices in a kind of counterpoint to the first season in which the wind was the main voice. So the clips I have shown are related to two moments in the filmmaking. The first one is related to the specific filming part, and the second one is related to the editing part. These two moments were not meant to be shown. So the first clip, I shot it in 2016. I set up the camera on a car at a certain angle, height, position, to shoot in the so-called sensorial mode, a mode that explores making an image from other senses than the human eye, in this case, from a car in motion. This is an experiment that I have done before in other films. I was inside the car, so I didn't follow the camera, I was not behind it. I wanted the car to decide those images for me. The car was both the support of the camera object and the journey script, being the journey and the filmmaking process itself, the plot. In the second clip, that was I could relate to the editing or second moment of writing in the filmmaking, is the sequence that is part of episode number 5, named Confess. So you can see it in the web series now. It was also shot in 2016 while we were playing around with the camera, recording sounds, questioning ourselves. It's like this situation shouldn't have ever been filmed. However, 3 years later, in 2019, during the editing of this season, we reviewed the material, and even if it was very painful to watch because we see ourselves in those images, exposing our small traumas, we decided not to shut it up and to fully assume it. In this sense, the second season of Distancia has been personally a more challenging process in managing my own oral story and addressing the role of photography not only as a medium for image making, but exactly, understandingly, also as a tool of appropriation and submission. Self-exposure connected to that part of the Chilean history we aborde in these episodes has been to me, for me, a sort of healing movement in a truth-telling practice in this fiction field. Since 2018, we haven't traveled to Tierra del Fuego to shoot, so this second season of Distancia is more likely an editing season in which the title Distancia, so distance, fully applies. In the interval between filming and editing, a degree of forgetting or rememorizing of revival of the experiences of interpretation has happened. So we have built up this season from material filmed years ago, as if they were found objects. We have reviewed the material, we have gone deeper in it, and so we have been articulating, composing, and recomposing the stories of this season. From there, it seems to me that the notion of ecofiction could be more evident. This has also enabled us to reconsider what Tierra del Fuego would come to mean under the notion of a so-called place at the end of the world. So said this, I will now let Ariel Bustamante, the sound artist of Distancia, that will talk about eco-fictional enunciations that are possible and the difficulties by this method. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. I would like to read a little text that I have written for this presentation. While driving to Caleta Maria in Tierra del Fuego, I left a portable audio device recording the entire trip. It recorded for several hours, and after a while, I forgot it was on. Camila and Carolina took this recording, edited, and constructed episode number 2 of Distancia's second season out of fragments of this 8-hour journey. This episode is titled Errar, to err. Most of what you can see from the video is the camera looking out at land from inside of the car, while I and the other 3 passengers, my friends, had a dense, long, and private conversation about art. In reality, however, you mostly just hear me talking, overriding the rest, loudly proclaiming stuff like, those successful artists, those who like to win all the awards. Let's not be like them. Let's instead be more like Hilma Af Klint. After all, art is some kind of religion, you know. We need to find out our own paths, to find out in what do we believe in the first place. It was truly painful to hear myself preaching like that. It was painful to bring me back into the present from a self-righteous private past again and again into the future. Now and forever, publicly installed, I present myself religiously proud of the sacrifices a pure artist should face, a purest antipode of an stereotype I seem to hate. What hurt the most is not the fact that eventually I was able to convince my friends in the car to agree with the rubbish I was talking about. What really hurts is to realize that some part of me still believes secretly in those statements, that in some way or another, I cannot fully discredit them. I don't know what it is, but maybe there is something in the passion, in the loudness of my voice that is able to incarnate some kind of truth that I'm not ready to defend safely today? At this point, this passion takes all the space inside of the video. Until minute 3.3, my voice have swallowed Tierra del Fuego. On minute 3.4, the chatter dissipates, and you can only hear the sounds of the car wheels striking the ground, the clatter of objects bouncing around its innards, and the hum of the wind shaking us inside. All of us humans are quiet now. On minute 3.5, an old recording of a lullaby starts playing. It's a beautiful but very sad song. Then the camera turns to the back of the car, directed at the smoke it has left behind as the wheels turn. In the midst of the smoke, you can see the four of us standing on the road, being left behind. I felt so sad and disappointed. The car continues by itself and the lullaby intensifies with it. We have disappeared inside the smoke. From the car's perspective, you can faintly hear me shouting back to the car, but the words are unintelligible from the erratic blob that is suspended over the road. The wind, the car, and the music have left in their own adventure, inside of an impossible recording. Wind, car, and music apparently agreeing on directions, concerting on wobbling together in a certain way to vibrate away from us. I stood there in the road, feeling miserable, looking at the car going away, wondering what was it that it made them to leave us? What convinced them that there was something terribly wrong with taking us along with them? It was embarrassing to be left like that, so radically invalidated, not really knowing how unacceptable you get to be for someone to take such a radical measure. On minute 7.0, the sound lowers down and the video slowly turns black. That's the end of the episode. Thank you. Maybe Mick now wants to comment on our interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, all three. Thank you, all three of you, for the presentations. My overall feeling is that the second time is radically different to the first time, much more playful, much more introspective. And I keep wanting to think of this as occurring in one special place, which resists easy conceptualization. That's Tierra del Fuego, otherwise known as the end of the world, which Camila elaborated upon as grist for thinking about ecofiction. Now, what the second time around suggests to me is that it allows the joints of your combined enterprise to loosen up. All the assumptions that we have and you have that guide conscious practice, otherwise concealed, are now much more visible, much more open, much more open to play. It reminded me a little bit of the process in psychoanalysis of free association, whereby one talks at random to the analyst and strange material pops up, which can then later on be analyzed, which is what I'm doing now, and to a certain extent you were doing a little earlier. I wondered particularly about autonomous recording instruments, whether the camera or the voice recorder. It's extremely interesting to think of art as being formed. Maybe Andy Warhol did some of this without a human hand necessarily guiding it. In the case of Carolina, this is the camera on the car. In the case of Ariel, this is a recording device within the car, so that after a while he can't even remember that it's on. I'd like to know more about letting the instruments free as compared with the tight control that certainly existed in the first episodes of DISTANCIA. I want you to talk a little bit about that. Most of all, I guess I'm interested in is how the accidental and the bizarre, what I call the human, all too human character, filmmaking crew is allowed to become part of this new film. Camila talks at one point about a sort of dissatisfaction, things getting stale, in my own words, that we found ourselves in the need to distance ourselves from our subject. We were too comfortable with what we were doing. This strikes me as another theme, hugely important. I know in my own case, I often feel this question of staleness, of being not, I don't know if it's too comfortable, but a certain monotony, and a hidden voice in myself says, I should break out of this. How can I break out of this? And you have, in this second series, given me an answer. So first of all, I think I'd ask a question of Camila, which is, could you elaborate in some way when you began to start to think that you were too comfortable with your subject? And what did that consist of, that feeling?
Thanks, Mick, for those words. Let's see. I began to notice about 3 years into the research in Tierra del Fuego that I was repeating certain stories about Tierra del Fuego, which in and of itself I don't think is a problem. There are stories that merit being told over and over again. But as I repeated them, I began to hear my own voice, and I noticed how settled it was. I spoke of the archipelago, of beavers, and of ancient forests with authority, as if I owned the stories I was narrating, rather than it being the other way around. I sensed that my storytelling, or in my storytelling, that I had positioned myself as the one with the voice. So this troubled me, because if I'd learned anything from my time in Tierra del Fuego, it was that stories emanate from the land, that they are alive, and to continue to hear them meant I felt that I had to empty myself from these ready-mades, these stories that were now exciting, and I could tell that they were exciting to others. But that power that was coming to me from the stories I was repeating was debilitating my own capacity to continue to hear what the stories wanted. And at about that time, I met Jose Tonco, who you also met when you came to Tierra del Fuego, Mick. And Jose is a Huéscar anthropologist who was on one of the trips that constitutes the body of images that is DISTANCIA first and second season. Maybe I'll share a clip of Jose telling all of us about a particular Huéscar concept that really enlightened for me this relationship between unsettling the voice and becoming more available to tell different kinds of stories where there are many characters that speak, and it's not just the author of the story or the speaker of the story that somehow controls the narrative. So I'll share a clip, but this clip is going to be part of season 3, so it hasn't been translated to English. So for those of you who are out there watching us or hearing us, it's about a minute and a half. Maybe some of you speak Spanish, you'll be able to listen to Jose directly, and if not, I will translate what he says afterwards. But because you won't hear him, I want you to pay attention, or some of you won't understand him. Maybe just pay attention to body language and to the dynamics in the group. Because what Jose is talking about has very much to do with how trust gets established within a collective, or he presents us with cuchelaxo. Cuchelaxo is a Kaweshkar concept that can sometimes be translated to friendship, but it's very different from friendship as being comfortable with the other. So you asked me about comfort and staleness and sort of settling into a relationship, or with a story, or with a subject which feels known. Whereas in Kaweshkar, friendship is actually based on trust. The trust in friendship is based on never assuming that you know the other. Rather, always paying attention, observing, and that friendship is really about observing the other and observing yourself as you observe the other. So it's a very unsettled relationship, dynamic and active. So I'll just show you that clip. I think that would be nice for all of you to meet Jose and see a little bit of what the 3rd season might be about.
¿Algo más que alguien quiera? ¿Algo que nos haga reír?
Sí, yo iba a decir, bueno, tú hablaste sobre la mentira. Bueno, yo voy a referirme sobre la confianza con respecto al mundo canoero, nómades. La confianza se gana tramo a tramo. O sea, con respecto, es muy curioso con la gente del nómade de Portadel, que no entra confianza inmediatamente, sino que empieza a mirar desde lo externo para ver el comportamiento de los individuos, cómo se comporta ese individuo en la sociedad o en la comunidad. Entonces van observando, y de hecho dentro del lenguaje de Kaweshkar existe un concepto bastante fuerte y bonito, que es cuchelaxo. Cuchelaxo es amigo, pero nosotros en el mundo occidental, cuchelaxo, que son, decimos amigo, como es genérico, como no tiene sentido. Pero en el mundo Kaweshkar sí tiene sentido, y el cuchelaxo en el mundo Kaweshkar serían aquellas personas que no es de tu sangre, que te ayuda en las buenas y en las malas, y que puede estar durante todo el año contigo.
So rather than translate, I think I'll leave it. Some of you may have understood Jose. Watch the 3rd season of DISTANCIA, maybe in a year's time, and you'll get a little bit more of cuchelaxo. Maybe you have questions for Ariel or Carolina.
I had some questions. By the way, I was very intrigued with your idea of stories as having, I suppose the term is agency, that they become, they're animate beings, like humans. I was reminded of Tom Mitchell's book, What Do Pictures Want? I was also thinking about, you were talking about really perfection, that one can never have a state of a perfection. One is always alienated from one's work. So that must be built into feeling too comfortable and then being alienated, and back and forth one goes. Carolina, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about your thoughts about autonomous, what I call an autonomous camera, like the camera on the car, and have you thought of any other filmmakers who've done such a thing?
Well, I am a little bit I don't know if I understand correctly, like the notion of autonomous, because I'm not pretty sure, like this could be an autonomous camera, in the sense that even though I wanted to explore and disembodiedness or detach the camera from my own eye, but I'm not thinking that it's necessarily autonomous. I could think that it's a camera that could be, it's much more like make body with other senses. It's not like really, I feel like the notion of autonomy constructed itself in a totally independent thing, and it's not necessarily that for me. It's like it's much more disembodied from my own body, but it engages in another supports or senses, like in the case that this could be like the car, as like to feel the motion of the car, like to and in other examples I've been like working with in the tree, for instance, putting the camera in the tree so as to other senses, other organs, other movements that I could never imagine could be recorded with a camera that is not really, I'm not really behind it. So that's why I could think that the idea of autonomy is, I could discuss it. And of course I think if I think in a very clear reference on this kind of disembodiment of a camera, I could for sure think in this anthropologist that called Caston Taylor, who made this film called Leviathan, that is this camera that was many cameras on a ship in the ocean, that allows a multi-perspectival views, that it's another way of understanding different kind of disembodiment.
I had a question for you and Ariel, and that is a question for all of us, actually, and that is, what gives with this sense of shame, embarrassment that both of you mentioned? Ariel went into in great length, and putting himself down. Is one defending oneself through a sort of overkill? And what about the people one photographs and films every day of the week, or the people one records? Surely they must feel this too when they see or hear themselves. So now we have the filmmaker and the sound recorder starting to feel embarrassed, talking about exposure, thinking about the implications of that for the DISTANCIA work. What do you think about this exposure? Do you think you're overdoing it?
It's a very difficult question. And in regards to this difference in between sound and image as formats, when we talk about self-exposure, well, the nature of sound is more volatile than an image. It passes as opposed to an image that is able to perpetuate itself as an object in time. So the register of sound is subjected inevitably to that ephemeral nature of passing. And we can say that on highly ocular-centric cultures, that oral register always provides some room for uncertainty, for that recording to be an illusion or something like that. So the quality of sound as evidence has less value, I will say. And in my case, in episode 2, the fact that you can only hear my voice and not my face, not my image, that I think gives me more immunity. You know, I can always put doubts on that recording, and that's not the case for episode 5, in which Camila and Carola talks about themselves in front of a camera. You know, I think that provides, we are in a total different scenario. And And about self-exposure, well, self-exposure, it's a form of vulnerability that I think at the same time is able to invite others to get close to you by showing them intimate secret parts of you. So it's an act of proximity at the same time. And that can be dangerous. You know, showing vulnerable parts of you in this way implies an opportunity, a good opportunity for you to change, you know, to be rearranged in unexpected ways with the help of others, to doubt. But it is also an opportunity to be abused. So how much you allow yourself to be seen by others needs to be negotiated. And that, I think, it's a negotiation that I'm also having with the territory. Besides inviting the audience to get close to me, it's also an invitation to get close to Tierra del Fuego. So I think in this relational exposure, I think that I'm waiting also for Tierra del Fuego to show more intimate parts of it to me next time, because I think I've shown enough. And in regards to the feeling of feeling ashamed, I'm not sure if I'm that focused or curious about the feeling itself, but more about what is it that we could do about it with others. You know, I can add to all the things that I regret saying in the text that I'm also ashamed of all the protocols of passing that I ignored, that I still ignored. You know, the codes of colonization and other exploitative forms of passing that have been erased in Tierra del Fuego. And I'm ashamed of not recognizing what was happening while I was there, to recognize certain winds or non-visual entities that were passing through me in the road, or that were passing through me and that might have been establishing some kind of relationship with me without me knowing. So, but that's some kind of shame that I think we need to overcome, you know, that we need to accept that we just don't know much about interacting with the non-human world in this particular territory, and that we have to depend a lot in our sensibilities or improvisational skills when meeting them. And that involves to make a lot of mistakes. But as Camila was saying, as Jose was saying, we have trust. You know, that's a special concept of friendship. That's already a protocol for passing, I think. But we might also have self-exposure and shaming as an alternative method to create new passing protocols, perhaps. Maybe I'm just extending myself too much. But yeah, maybe you want to reply to all of us.
Okay.
What do you think?
Let's see what our invisible audience has to say.
Yeah, there's a question there that I'm reading in the Q&A box.
We lost you, Camila.
I can read it.
I encourage, and so hello, Anonymous.
Okay.
And they are saying, I have a question for the group of artists and Michael. How is your methodology and final outcome of the work different from plain visual anthropology? Institutional outcomes aside, the work being exhibited by an art institution, I would like to hear a solid elaboration on this issue. Does anybody want to start? So just to paraphrase, or how is your methodology and final outcome of the work different from plain visual anthropology?
Do you want me to answer? Well, it's so radically self-reflexive to begin with, and that's certainly not mainstream or anthropology, visual or otherwise. I would start there. It's asking questions about the filmmaking process, just as a writer of an ethnography should be asking provocative questions about how they got to the field and what their writing is all about. This constant self-questioning, which, as Camila pointed out in the beginning, has to do with the notion of ecofiction for this particular spot that orients north and south, the spot being Tierra del Fuego. That's what I think it build the difference.
I would add to that a little bit of history, which is that DISTANCIA comes out of Ensayos, and Ensayos is a research methodology that is nomadic and collective, and it's invested in the well-being of an archipelago, Tierra del Fuego, and more recently other archipelagos that are connected in physical and sometimes unphysical ways. And the web series itself is one tool that we use to create these relationships of trust with the land and with the locals who live there. So it's an investment in their stories, and it is the process of filming, producing, editing, and then distributing the web series are all part of that of that strengthening of the collaborations that are needed to get a lot of environmental work done in Tierra del Fuego. Why I wanted to show that clip by Jose and this concept of cuchilaxo and of friendship as something that occurs over time and through deep observation of the other is what DISTANCIA is. It's a mode of strengthening friendships to and for other purposes, which I won't enumerate all of them today here, but you can find out more about them through Ensayos and through this residency. They have to do with coastal conservation work, they have to do with invasive species work, and also with anthropology and a kind of remediation of some of the problems that have been laid on the archipelago through anthropological work that circulates about it. That's my response. I don't know if Ariel or Carolina want to say anything else. There's another question in here, if not, but I'll leave it up to you. Ariel, Caro, do you want to respond or anything else? So then maybe I'll read this next question, which says, can you elaborate how you figure out which stories the land, the wind, the trees, etc., want to be told? Or even if they want to become a protagonist of your films at all, how do you figure out what they're telling you? Ari, maybe this is a good one for you.
It's a very difficult question because that will involve to know when a relationship have started, and I think many times we just don't know when a relationship have started, So, and this is a question that I have also for the way that I will be relating myself in the territory, I was, one of the questions that I have was, do I need to learn a language to, as the question was saying, to learn what is it that this or this other thing wants to say to me, and that involves to be aware of what are the codes, what are the signs that are being exchanged, and that cannot be done. It's not an easy thing to do, especially in this territory where all the ways to encounter another, to communicate with another, have been erased. So, so I think for me, I started from the assumption that I just don't know how to consciously being aware of how these things wanted to be, how they wanted to be in relationship with me, or in relationship with what I was doing, or the relationship or the aims these things will have to be or not being in my recorder. You know, I think there was a lot of, as I was saying, of improvisation and a lot of weak sensibilities for me to try to improvise, you know, and that, I think, it's a condition for passing. You know, every time you encounter someone, there's a lot of things that you can prepare, but the intensity of the encounter just force you to improvise a way of to communicate or to get close to this other thing. So that's what I can say, I think.
Mick, did you want to say something to
No, I thought Carolina should jump in.
There's a question here that maybe Carolina, you'd like to respond to, and it's a question about limits. Limits. The question comes with a description of a trip that somebody takes within a city, and from there the question is, what are the limits of an experience of a trip? So can you be on a journey that I'm interpreting a little bit merits a document or to be documented? I'm throwing this question to you, Carolina, because I think it has to do with this this relationship of these disembodied cameras and a car. Sort of, what is the limit of your experience, and where does it meet the experience of the car? I think that's where the question is headed.
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, yeah, I'm trying to read the question also, like to try to grab it, because I think it's I don't fully understand it. I mean, I don't fully get it, but yeah, I don't know. Right? So I could say, I mean, the experience of being in a car, or it's the experience of shooting with the camera in front of the, like what I'm showing in my backdrop here, right? It's inverted camera. It's a methodology of trying to. It's a methodology on experiencing the other way, a trip where I could never imagine, I would never know which could be the images of it. So at a certain point by organizing or displacing my eye, putting it outside and making itself kind of depending of another motion, it allows an experience that it could never even ever imagine. I could just like have the intuition of it. But that in the sense of purely methodological experiencing this way of filming. And the other like experience is like being in a car inside in the context of having the time passing to go from one place to another. So in this case, we were like having these long trips, as was describing Ariel, and having the feeling that what happened to me at the first time when I arrived to to that specific place, Caleta Maria, where we shot, it was like the feeling I was having a completely flat feeling. I was without my glasses, and I have completely distorted vision. I felt like everything was flat, and in a certain point my perception was transformed, and it was not even a kind of device. It was just like my feeling of being transported in a long trip and experiencing a long distance trip at that time, having in my mind the end of the world. So that also kind of contributed to a very particular state of mind and spirit in grabbing on being able to have this perception of what I'm looking at. Where are we arriving? I didn't see even a bay. I thought it was like a sort of the sea, more like this kind of bay, and the sea was just like vertical. So yeah, I don't know if I answer exactly the question. It's just, but I can say that.
I think we only have a couple of minutes left, but I am just going to kind of group 2 comments, questions, and then open it up so that we can close on a semi-polemic that's boiling here in the questions, and somebody's thanking for the conversation, but also without trying to polemicize, though it's polemic is good. Self-reflexivity is not the sole territory of filmmaking. From Rouge and even before, anthropologists have used self-reflexive film techniques to approach their subjects. I argue this is not remotely new or particular to this project. It can be argued that anthropology pioneered ways of approaching their subjects in a self-reflexive manner. But they would also like to add that they find it slightly problematic, this inclusion of Tierra del Fuego within the highly speculative field of contemporary arts at the new museum, especially considering the role of contemporary art museums and its extension through projects, plays, and gentrification, sort of, may I call it, neocolonization of cities and new territories. So there's that there hanging and looming, but there's also a question about extinction and the horizon of extinction, both historical and future, in terms of impacts on our work in Tierra del Fuego. And for some reason, I'm relating these 2 questions. So because I'm relating them, I'll just say something brief and then open it up for anybody who wants to add, which is that this question about extinction in Tierra del Fuego is extremely relevant because many of the indigenous peoples that we work with there have been considered extinct themselves. Some are not even recognized as living culture. So it is quite often our responsibility to their need and their desire to come off of the extinction list and be recognized as a living culture that continues to mobilize us into our methods of creating documents and questioning how we create documents like this web series. So it's it's a relationship between what's needed and what wants to be shown, what doesn't want to be shown. And in that sense, we are deeply questioning the ways in which neocolonization works, and quite often find that we are invited back by some of our collaborators to create more of these documents and co-author them. So that's where the 3rd season is going. But all of this needs to be done slowly, like Jose says, over long periods of time. It doesn't happen immediately. So that's why the web series is a format that's conducive to that long form friendship. I don't know if anybody wants to add. There are many more questions, but I'm wondering,
where are they?
On the New Museum side, they're in the Q&A here.
No.
There's this question. I don't know if we're running out of time, but there's a question on format. How has the format of a web series offered you representation and discursive possibilities that a documentary or a long-length film would not have? And I think that that is a question that is direct, I mean, kind of directly related to the other question that considers problematic the fact that this web series could be shown in a context of a contemporary art, and that could be even problematic as also a documentary film could be shown in a documentary film festival. I mean, I think it's not, I mean, there are equal, discussion on that. But what the web series proposes as a format of small stories and different lengths is the possibility of construct stories that are in a way more flexible, that have a full or feature film or a medium format film. I mean, this was a means of experimenting length also, and as the possibility of construct stories in a flexible way. And the web also allows that is not possible in television, that has extremely defined formats. So in the web, we could just like have 1 minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 5 minutes. That I think it's enables us to play also with the plots and the narrative. I mean, the length, it's an important thing, and it allows us also to present here in a contemporary art museum context, as also to compact everything in one role and to present in another context. So the idea is like not to be fully included in one kind of context, but to navigate different contexts. So allow a different public to watch the work. That is, I could say.
And to add to that, this being shown at the new museum or online through that digital platform is something that the speculation that is referenced in that question is also something that can quite often be desired by peoples, including ourselves, whose narratives are remote or marginalized, difficult to see or discover, even if they are online. So when within Ensayos we get an invitation from an art institution, because many of us in the collective are artists, it is quite often the scientists and some of our indigenous collaborators or non-artists who are most excited about the opportunity of those forms of distribution of the kinds of experiences that we are building on the ground, and the sorts of causes or our missions, and that they can be disseminated otherwise. So perhaps we'll leave it at that and really thank everyone who has stayed through this conversation, which was an experiment in this first digital residency. And again, to thank Emily Mello and Andrew and the whole team for giving Ensayos this opportunity. We want you to keep watching DISTANCIA and the seasons to come, but also to tune in to a series of listening sessions that will arise in a theater performance, play, laboratory game that we're putting on at the end of the residency. And to all of you whose questions we didn't answer, please, we will keep track of them, but also feel free to get in touch with us in the many ways that that's possible, through the Ensayos website, through the new museum. And thank you, Mick, for joining us.
Pleasure.